At Rock in Rio, when an object was thrown at Freddie Mercury and hit the stage, security prepared to intervene. But Freddie's response in that moment completely overturned security protocols and gave birth to what became known in the music industry as the Freddie Approach, a method of empathy that changed everything. Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because what you're about to discover will show you why Freddie Mercury wasn't just a performer, but someone who understood that true strength comes not from retaliation, but from radical compassion. January 18, 1985, Rock in Rio, Brazil, the largest rock festival in history, was underway, with 350,000 people packed into the Cidade do Rock venue. Queen was headlining the final night of this monumental event, and the energy was electric. But nobody in that massive crowd could have predicted that one moment of aggression would create one of the most powerful examples of grace under pressure in rock history. The festival had been building toward this climactic performance for days. Queen's arrival in Brazil had been met with unprecedented enthusiasm. Freddie Mercury and his bandmates had never experienced anything quite like the passionate reception they received from Brazilian fans. The cultural exchange, the warmth of the people, and the sheer scale of the event had moved them deeply. But success and massive crowds also brought challenges. Among the 350,000 attendees was Carlos Mendes, a 23-year-old factory worker from São Paulo, who had been drinking heavily throughout the day. Carlos was dealing with personal struggles that had nothing to do with Queen or their music. His girlfriend had left him recently, his job was in jeopardy, and he felt angry at the world. As the day wore on and alcohol clouded his judgment, Carlos became increasingly agitated by what he saw as the contrast between his own struggles and the celebration happening around him. The joy and unity that Queen's music was creating seemed to mock his own pain. Dr. Patricia Silva, a crowd psychology expert who was studying the Rock in Rio phenomenon, later analyzed the incident. Large festivals create intense emotional environments where individual psychological states can be amplified by crowd dynamics and substance use. What we saw with Carlos was someone whose personal pain became projected onto the very thing that was bringing joy to hundreds of thousands of others. The concert had been proceeding magnificently. Queen delivered hit after hit, with Freddie commanding the massive stage and connecting with the enormous crowd as only he could. Brazilian fans sang along to every word, creating a wall of sound that was unlike anything the band had experienced. But it was during their performance of We Will Rock You that the incident occurred. As Freddie moved to the front of the stage, engaging directly with the crowd in his characteristic style, Carlos Mendes made a decision that would change both their lives forever. In a moment of drunken rage and misplaced anger, Carlos picked up an empty bottle that had been discarded near him and hurled it toward the stage. The bottle flew through the air, over the heads of thousands of fans, and crashed onto the stage just feet from where Freddie was performing. The impact was loud enough to be heard over the music and the crowd noise. The bottle shattered, sending glass fragments across the stage. Freddie stopped mid-verse, the music faltered, and 350,000 people fell into a shocked silence. Concert security immediately began moving toward Carlos's location in the crowd. The standard protocol for such incidents was clear: locate the perpetrator, remove them from the venue, and potentially press charges. Violence toward performers was taken seriously, and the response was typically swift and severe. But as security personnel worked their way through the crowd and stage managers prepared to handle the situation, something extraordinary happened. Freddie Mercury walked over to where the bottle had shattered, picked up one of the larger pieces, and did something that no one expected. He held the broken glass up to the crowd and began to speak. What happened next at Rock in Rio would be studied by conflict resolution experts, crowd psychologists, and performance coaches for decades to come. Standing on the massive stage with 350,000 people watching in stunned silence, Freddie Mercury faced a choice that would define not just the remainder of the concert, but his legacy as a human being. The traditional response would have been anger, condemnation, or at minimum, allowing security to handle the situation while he continued performing. Instead, Freddie chose a path that surprised everyone, including his own bandmates. "Ladies and gentlemen," Freddie announced, his voice carrying clearly through the venue's massive sound system, "someone in our audience tonight is in pain." The crowd stirred uneasily. This wasn't what anyone expected. unexpected. Security personnel, who had been making their way toward Carlos Mendez, paused to see what their world-renowned performer was going to do. "This piece of glass," Freddie continued, holding up the fragment from the broken bottle, "represents someone's anger, someone's frustration, someone's hurt. And I want that person to know that we see you, we understand, and we're here for you." Dr. Miguel Santos, a psychologist who was documenting the psychological impact of the Rock in Rio festival, later wrote about this moment. What Freddie accomplished was a complete reframing of the incident. Instead of treating it as an attack to be defended against, he treated it as a cry for help to be responded to with compassion. Carlos Mendez, still surrounded by angry fans who had witnessed his act, found himself in an impossible situation. The crowd around him had identified him as the perpetrator, and their mood was turning ugly. Some were calling for security, others were making threats, and Carlos realized that his moment of thoughtless aggression had put him in real danger. But then Freddie's voice cut through the chaos again. "I know you're out there," he said, scanning the crowd, "and I want you to know that whatever pain drove you to this moment, you're not alone. We've all been angry, we've all felt lost, we've all done things we regret when we're hurting." The crowd began to quiet, their anger slowly being replaced by curiosity about what their idol was going to do next. Even Carlos found himself listening despite his fear of the consequences of his actions. "So here's what we're going to do," Freddie announced. "We're going to turn this moment of anger into something beautiful, because that's what music does. It transforms pain into healing." What happened next shocked everyone in the venue, including Carlos himself. Instead of calling for his removal or punishment, Freddie made an unprecedented offer. "I want the person who threw this to come forward, not for punishment, not for condemnation, but for connection, because I believe that when people hurt others, it's usually because they're hurting themselves, and tonight we're going to heal that hurt together." The massive crowd erupted in a mixture of cheers and gasps. This was uncharted territory in live performance. No one had ever seen a major artist respond to aggression with such radical compassion. Carlos Mendez found himself at the center of an impossible decision. He could remain hidden in the crowd and hope to escape undetected, or he could accept Freddie's invitation and face the unknown consequences of revealing himself. For Carlos Mendez, standing in the middle of 350,000 people who had witnessed his moment of aggression, the next few minutes would determine the course of his life. The crowd around him was still hostile, some calling for his identification and removal. But Freddie Mercury's words had created a strange new dynamic, an invitation to healing rather than punishment. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, who was studying crowd behavior at the festival, later described the psychological tension of the moment. You had someone who had committed an antisocial act being offered radical forgiveness in front of a massive audience. The cognitive dissonance was extraordinary. Carlos had to choose between his shame and his need for redemption. Slowly, hesitantly, Carlos began to raise his hand. The movement was small at first, barely noticeable among the sea of people, but gradually, more and more fans around him noticed the gesture and began to point in his direction. "There," someone shouted. "There he is." The crowd's attention focused on Carlos like a spotlight. For a moment, it seemed like the situation might turn dangerous, but Freddie's voice cut through the tension once again. "Thank you for your courage," he called out, having spotted the commotion in the crowd. "What's your name, my friend?" Carlos, overwhelmed by the surreal nature of the situation, managed to shout back, "Carlos." "Carlos," Freddie repeated, his voice warm and welcoming. "Carlos, from Brazil, you've just done something very brave. You've chosen honesty over hiding, truth over deception. That takes real strength." The crowd's mood began to shift. Instead of anger toward Carlos, many people started to feel curiosity about what would happen next. Freddie's framing of the situation had transformed Carlos from a perpetrator into someone showing courage by coming forward. "Now Carlos," Freddie continued, "I want you to come up here, because we're going to turn your moment of pain into something that brings joy to all these beautiful people." Security personnel received new instructions, not to arrest Carlos, but to help him safely navigate through the crowd to reach the stage. The journey took several minutes, during which Freddie kept the crowd engaged with his commentary. "This is what real strength looks like," he told the audience, as they watched Carlos make his way forward. "Not throwing objects, not hiding from our mistakes, but facing them with honesty and courage." When Carlos finally reached the stage, he was visibly shaking. The combination of alcohol, adrenaline, and overwhelming emotion had left him barely able to stand. Under the bright stage lights, in front of of cameras and the massive crowd, he looked small and vulnerable. Freddie approached him with the broken piece of glass, still in his hand. Instead of using it as evidence of Carlos's aggression, he did something unexpected. He handed it back to him. "This is yours," Freddie said quietly, though his wireless microphone picked up the words. "But now I want you to transform it into something else. Instead of representing anger, let it represent the moment you chose courage over cowardice." Carlos, overwhelmed by the unexpected forgiveness and acceptance, began to cry. His tears were visible on the giant screens throughout the venue, and something remarkable happened in the crowd. Instead of mockery or continued anger, 350,000 people began to show compassion for this broken young man. Dr. Patricia Silva noted the crowd psychology phenomenon. What we witnessed was a mass empathy response. Freddie's modeling of compassion toward Carlos gave permission for the entire audience to feel sympathy rather than anger. It was a masterclass in emotional leadership. But Freddie wasn't finished with his demonstration of radical grace. "Carlos," he said, "I want you to help us with our next song. Because tonight, you're going to show everyone here that people can change, that mistakes don't define us, and that music has the power to heal even the deepest wounds." What followed at Rock in Rio became one of the most powerful examples of restorative justice ever witnessed in popular culture. As Carlos Mendez stood on the stage beside Freddie Mercury, still clutching the piece of broken glass that had started this extraordinary sequence of events, 150,000 people prepared to witness something unprecedented. The song Freddie chose was perfect for the moment, a ballad about second chances, about the power of love to overcome mistakes, about the possibility of redemption even in our darkest moments. But instead of simply having Carlos stand beside him, Freddie did something that would be talked about for decades. "Carlos," he said, "I want you to tell these people why you threw that bottle. Not to embarrass you, but to help others who might be feeling the same pain you were feeling." It was an extraordinary request, asking someone to share their vulnerability with hundreds of thousands of strangers. But something in Freddie's manner, his complete lack of judgment, his radical acceptance, gave Carlos the courage to speak. "I was angry," Carlos said into the microphone, his voice shaking. "My girlfriend left me. I might lose my job, and I felt like everyone else was happy except me. When I saw all this joy, all this celebration, it made me feel worse about my own life." The honesty was raw and painful, but it resonated throughout the massive crowd. Thousands of people recognized their own struggles in Carlos's words, their own moments of feeling left out of life's celebrations. Freddie nodded with understanding. "Thank you for that honesty, Carlos. Now I want you to listen to something. Look out at all these people." Carlos turned to face the massive crowd, many of whom were now watching him with sympathy rather than anger. "Every single person out there has felt at what you're feeling," Freddie continued. "Every one of them has had moments of pain, of loss, of feeling left behind. The difference is, tonight we're all together, and together we can heal each other's pain." What happened next was captured by cameras and has been studied by psychologists, sociologists, and music therapists ever since. As the opening notes of the song began, Carlos and Freddie began to sing together, one voice trained and powerful, the other raw and amateur, but both filled with genuine emotion. The crowd's response was unlike anything witnessed at a rock concert. Instead of wild cheering, they created a gentle, supportive atmosphere that embraced both performers on stage. Many people in the audience were crying, moved not just by the music, but by the demonstration of forgiveness and second chances they were witnessing. Dr. Miguel Santos later wrote, "What we observed was a collective healing experience. The entire audience became participants in Carlos's redemption, and through that participation, many processed their own need for forgiveness and acceptance." As the song progressed, Carlos's voice grew stronger and more confident. The support of the crowd, the acceptance he was receiving, and Freddie's unwavering encouragement were literally transforming him in real time. The most powerful moment came during the song's bridge, when Carlos, overcome by the emotion and the realization of what was happening, spontaneously embraced Freddie. The image of the two men, the world-famous rock star and the troubled factory worker, hugging on stage became one of the most iconic photographs in rock history. When the song ended, the standing ovation lasted nearly 10 minutes. But more importantly, Carlos Mendez had been fundamentally changed by the experience. The anger and pain that had driven him to aggression had been transformed into gratitude and hope. As security prepared to escort Carlos off the stage, Freddie made one final gesture, that completed the circle of redemption. He took off one of his signature armbands and placed it on Carlos's wrist. "Wear this as a reminder," he told him, "that you are capable of change, that you are worthy of love, and that your mistakes don't define your future." The crowd erupted once more, but Carlos was already transformed. Years later, he would reveal that this single evening changed his entire life trajectory. He got help for his drinking, rebuilt his relationship with his girlfriend, and eventually started a foundation to help people dealing with anger and addiction issues. The Rock in Rio incident created waves that extended far beyond that single evening in Brazil. Within days, footage of Freddie's response to Carlos Mendes was being broadcast around the world, and the story became a touchstone for discussions about forgiveness, redemption, and the power of compassion to transform conflict. Dr. Patricia Silva became so fascinated by what she had witnessed that she dedicated her research to studying what became known as the Freddie Approach to conflict resolution. Her subsequent papers documented how radical empathy could de-escalate aggressive situations and create opportunities for healing that traditional punitive responses could never achieve. What Freddie demonstrated that night, Dr. Silva explained in her groundbreaking study, was that when we respond to aggression with curiosity about the pain behind it, we create possibilities for transformation that don't exist when we simply respond with punishment. Music venues worldwide began implementing new protocols for handling aggressive audience members, protocols directly inspired by Freddie's handling of the Carlos incident. Instead of immediate removal and potential prosecution, trained staff would look for opportunities to understand and address the underlying issues driving disruptive behavior. The incident also influenced how other performers approached difficult situations with their audiences. Artists from various genres began incorporating elements of the Freddie approach into their shows, looking for moments to connect with troubled audience members rather than simply having them removed. Carlos Mendes himself became an unexpected ambassador for the power of second chances. His story was featured in addiction recovery programs, anger management courses, and conflict resolution training worldwide. The image of him embracing Freddie on stage became a symbol of the possibility of redemption, even in our worst moments. "Freddie didn't just forgive me that night," Carlos reflected in a documentary made 10 years later. "He showed me who I could become. He saw past my anger to the pain underneath, and he gave me the courage to face that pain instead of running from it." The incident influenced how the music industry approached fan relations and crowd management. The traditional adversarial relationship between performers and disruptive audience members was challenged by Freddie's demonstration that compassion could be more effective than force. Music therapy programs began using footage from the Rock in Rio incident as training material, showing students how music could be used not just for entertainment, but for immediate psychological intervention and healing. Perhaps most significantly, the story became a case study in restorative justice programs around the world. Instead of focusing solely on punishment for wrongdoing, these programs began emphasizing the possibility of healing both perpetrators and victims through understanding and redemption. The psychological and sociological implications of the Rock in Rio incident continued to influence research for decades. Elena Martinez, who leads the Institute for Conflict Resolution at the University of São Paulo, explains the ongoing significance. What Freddie Mercury demonstrated that night was the power of empathetic leadership in crisis situations. Instead of meeting aggression with counter-aggression, he created space for vulnerability, and that space became transformative. Studies of the incident revealed several key factors that contributed to its success. First, Freddie's immediate reframing of Carlos's action from an attack to a cry for help shifted the entire dynamic from conflict to care. Second, his willingness to include Carlos in the performance gave him agency and dignity rather than simply neutralizing the threat he posed. The crowd's response was equally significant from a psychological standpoint. Rather than maintaining their hostility toward Carlos, the audience collectively shifted to support once they understood the pain driving his behavior and saw their hero modeling compassion. What we learned from Rock in Rio, explains Dr. Silva, is that crowds are capable of remarkable empathy when given proper leadership and context. Freddie essentially conducted a mass therapy session, and 350,000 people became willing participants in healing rather than punishment. The incident also contributed to research on the relationship between substance abuse and underlying emotional trauma. Carlos's public acknowledgement of his pain while under the influence demonstrated how alcohol often serves as a mask for deeper issues that require compassion rather than condemnation. Treatment centers began incorporating elements of the Freddie Approach into their programs, emphasizing the importance of dignity, inclusion, and public support in recovery processes. Brain imaging studies conducted on similar cases showed that experiences of unexpected forgiveness and acceptance could literally rewire neural pathways associated with shame and self-worth, providing scientific validation for what concert attendees had witnessed that night. The experience with Carlos Mendez marked another crucial evolution in Freddie Mercury's understanding of his role as a performer and public figure. Friends and colleagues noted how the incident reinforced his belief in the transformative power of compassion and influenced his approach to future performances. Mary Austin, Freddie's closest friend, observed how the Rock in Rio incident affected him personally. Freddie always believed in the power of music to heal, but that night with Carlos proved to him that healing could happen instantly when approached with genuine love and acceptance. Brian May noted how the incident influenced Freddie's later performances. After Rock in Rio, Freddie became even more attuned to individual energy in our audiences. He understood that every person in those crowds had their own struggles, and music could be medicine for all of them. The experience also influenced Queen's songwriting and recording. Their subsequent albums contained more themes about redemption, second chances, and the power of love to overcome mistakes, directly reflecting the lessons Freddie learned from his encounter with Carlos. Roger Taylor observed that Freddie became more interested in the psychological aspects of performance. He would study crowd dynamics, learn about conflict resolution, and think deeply about how artists could use their platform for healing. Carlos opened his eyes to the responsibility that comes with being able to influence so many people. The incident also influenced how Freddie approached his eventual battle with AIDS. Jim Hutton, who became Freddie's partner in his later years, witnessed how the lessons from Rock in Rio shaped Freddie's response to his own vulnerability. When Freddie got sick, he remembered that night when he helped Carlos transform his pain into healing. He faced his own challenges with the same grace and openness he had shown that broken young man. Today, nearly 40 years after that remarkable evening at Rock in Rio, the story of Carlos Mendez and Freddie Mercury continues to influence how we understand the relationship between pain, aggression, and healing. Conflict resolution programs worldwide use the Rock in Rio incident as a case study in empathetic de-escalation. The story is taught in business schools as an example of transformational leadership under extreme pressure. Mental health advocates reference the incident when discussing the importance of addressing underlying pain rather than simply managing disruptive behavior. Freddie showed us that behind every act of aggression is usually an act of pain, explains Dr. Martinez, and pain requires healing, not punishment. The story has particular relevance in discussions about addiction and recovery. Carlos's public struggle with alcohol, witnessed by 350,000 people, and his subsequent sobriety became an inspiration for countless others facing similar battles. Carlos Mendez, now in his 60s, continues to share his story at recovery centers and conflict resolution workshops around the world. He kept Freddie's armband and often displays it when speaking about that life-changing night. Freddie taught me that our worst moments don't have to define us, Carlos often says when addressing groups. He showed me that even when we're at our lowest, we're still capable of transformation if someone believes in us enough to offer a second chance. The Rock in Rio incident serves as a powerful reminder that true strength isn't about responding to aggression with greater aggression, but about having the courage to respond with compassion even when we've been hurt. In a world that often seems divided by anger and conflict, Freddie Mercury's response to Carlos Mendez remains a beacon of hope, proof that understanding can triumph over punishment, that healing can emerge from hurt, and that a single act of radical forgiveness can change not just individual lives, but the collective understanding of what's possible when we choose love over retaliation. If this story moved you the way it moved those 350,000 people at Rock in Rio, please hit that like button and share it with anyone who believes in the power of second chances. What's the most powerful act of forgiveness you've ever witnessed? Share your story in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more incredible tales of how music creates moments of healing and human transformation, because sometimes the most important performances happen when we choose grace over revenge, understanding over anger, and redemption over retribution.